everybody, and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today I'm going to be talking about a really major mechanic throughout a lot of different games that is used in many different contexts. But today I'm going to be talking about games that use this as a very core mechanic, and that is deck building. Deck building is something that has been around for a very, very long time. And don't worry, I'm not going to be talking about Dominion, because everybody knows Dominion already, and personally I really just don't like it that much, but shh, don't tell nobody about that. And also don't look at the fact that I have like 4 games of Dominion on my shelf. But either way, so overall I will say right off the bat, I like Dominion, but it's just not on my top 5. But what I will be talking about are games that utilize, use the deck building mechanic as something that's very central to either the gameplay theme, the gameplay style, just the game itself, whatever it happens to be. Now, there are a lot of games that utilize deck building in numerous different contexts. So the first thing that comes to my mind would be something like Mage Knight. You do have a deck building mechanic in there, but it's really kind of ancillary to a lot of other aspects. So that's something that I'd like to hear from you guys. Do you appreciate games that use this as a core mechanic? Are you okay with it as an ancillary mechanic? Do you prefer it as an ancillary mechanic? Do you not like games to rely on it? But either way, with that, oh, excuse me, geez, with that, I'm going to go right on ahead and get started with my number 5. Before I get started with number 5, I just have a couple of little things to talk about it alongside number 4. Both number 4 and 5 are sci-fi themed games that actually have a very similar gameplay ideal. Like the actual goals are very, very similar, but they do have some very distinct differences. The other major thing is that I actually don't own either one of them, but I do love both games, and I'm waiting so that I'm able to get them at some point. But regardless, with that, number 5 is Core Worlds. Core Worlds is a really, really, really fun deck building game that puts you in the seat of a galactic civilization of some sort. Now, there are a lot of games that do that. You've got Twilight Imperium, you've got Proxima Centauri, you've got Eclipse, you got all sorts of different games like that that do that. The reason that I really like Core Worlds is that depending on which faction you pick, or which group you pick, whatever it is, civilization that you pick, you actually get a starter deck, which is something that you do see a lot within deck building games, but in Core Worlds, your starter deck is actually fairly unique. So in that way, it's really, really cool, because I like the idea of being able to play as a different group, a different race, different species, whatever you want to call them, and the gameplay itself really feels different simply because you have a different starting deck. Now, after that, you end up having common cards that you're trying to acquire. You've got tech, you've got worlds that you can conquer, just all sorts of different stuff like that. And basically the idea is just that at the end, whoever has the most points wins. It's really cool. It's a really fun little game. I think it plays up to 5 players, if I'm not mistaken. It might be 4, but it's a really, really cool little game that, again, I really like simply because of the variety that you get with it, because everybody has their own mostly unique starter deck, or at least somewhat unique starter deck. But then beyond that, everybody is picking from a pool that everybody can see, everybody knows what you're trying to do, and you have to balance things like you have to balance your different militaries. You've got your space military, you've got your world military, like your infantry, effectively your ground troops, all that kind of stuff. And it's an interesting game. It's an interesting deck building game that actually gets that type of combat done very, very well. Something like that is relatively rare, so immediately I think of something like Race for the Galaxy, where you have the takeover mechanic that was added in, what was it, Rebel versus Imperium, I want to say, the second expansion. And as I've said many, many times, I said it in my review for Race for the Galaxy, I really don't use it simply because it never really comes up. But with something like Core Worlds, it's really a solid integral mechanic in the entire game. So I really, really enjoy it. Core Worlds is a really great example of a deck builder, and the only reason that it's at number 5 is just because the other games I happen to enjoy more. But that's really it. Other than that, Core Worlds, absolutely amazing game, and my number 5 deck building game. I mentioned, number 4 is arguably kind of like a cousin for Core Worlds. It's another sci-fi game, but it plays very, very differently. This one is Star Realms. Star Realms is a wonderful example of what you can do with deck building mechanics. The way that this works is on a drafting system, and you've got a bunch of different factions whose cards you're picking from, essentially. And the idea is that you want to synergize your cards together. You want to have cards that are of the same faction, because it means that you're going to be getting higher bonuses. You're going to be getting more points effectively, and I really, really appreciate it because like a lot of these games, it actually combines a drafting mechanic alongside it as well. So you get to the point where you have to decide, am I going to pick a card that is only good for me and I'm picking it for that sole purpose, or am I going to pick this card which doesn't benefit me a great deal, but more so I know that my opponent really wants it, so I'm specifically taking it so that they can't. You know, that type of strategic decision, which is really, really interesting, and I greatly enjoy. That said, Star Realms, I believe it's only a 2-player game at the start, but you can actually add additional decks, and it allows you to play with a total of, I think it's up to 6 people. Basically, if you have 3 copies of the decks, then you can play with 6 people, which makes for a much more interesting dynamic. I haven't played with more than, I think it was 3 was the most, but just as a 2-player game, it's actually really, really good, and that's one of the reasons why I like it more than Core Worlds, is that this was actually really designed for 2 people. So when you add more people to it, it's really not bad. I mean, it's basically more of the same, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's great to have more of that versatility compared to Core Worlds. But either way, Star Realms, another really great game where you have a lot more control over how your deck goes and what you're doing. That's very reminiscent of even something like Seven Wonders, where you're trying to do the set collection and things like that. But either way, absolutely amazing game. Star Realms, my number 4. I've got another game that I actually do not own myself, but in this case I have a pretty good set. At number 3, I've got another game that I do not own myself, but I have a pretty good placeholder for this particular one, and the placeholder that I've got is my big giant Cthulhu die here. Let's see. Oh man, I got the squiggly lines. I don't remember how to play, I don't remember what it actually is, but either way, the game itself is A Study in Emerald. Study in Emerald is a really, really interesting deck builder game in that the deck building is arguably the most ancillary compared to all of the other games on this particular list. So for the vast majority of them, the deck building is really central. That's what I wanted to go for. And this one, it's a little bit more ancillary, but not quite as much. Or not too much, I should say. But either way, Study in Emerald is a really, really fun game that smashes together Cthulhu, the H.P. Lovecraft mythos, and the like a Sherlock Holmesian type mystery type of thing. The way that it works is you actually have 2 teams. You don't know who's on which team, but you have the, I believe it's the revolutionists and the cultists. I don't remember the exact names, but basically you have people who are trying to stop the elder ones or the old ones, and then people who like the old ones. So part of the idea behind the game is that you're trying to figure out what team everybody is on, and to an extent at least trying to throw them off your trail so that they're not quite certain what's going on. The way that the entire game works is relatively simple. You've got individual cubes that you use to influence different locations within a city. The deck building comes into play because several of the locations actually have a bunch of cards available that you can pick from. The cards do any and everything. Well, not any and everything, but they do a lot of different things, ranging from enabling you to kill or hide one of the important people. So you've got the I want to say they're kings, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, the goal of the people fighting against the old ones are trying to kill some of the old ones, and you can actually play cards that hide them so that they're not killable. And the other thing, you can actually attack your fellow players. You've got secret spy people that you can utilize in numerous different ways. There's all sorts of cool stuff. It's very unique in the context of deck building because it's not a standard deck building style of game where normally, you know, you've got X number of cards and you've got like attack cards and buy cards. And, you know, with X number of buy cards, then you can purchase a new one, discard everything, and then you reshuffle it all together. It doesn't work that way. Whereas with A Study in Emerald, the idea is more of you're building up a specific group of cards, a very specific hand of cards. There's no drafting mechanic or anything like that, but it's a really good game, first off, but it's full of intrigue is really the biggest aspect to it. The fact that you don't know what team everybody is on, except for yourself, obviously, makes it a very unique gaming experience, especially when it comes down to you're essentially trying to investigate your fellow players to see what side they're on. And beyond that, you know, all of the different cards having all the different capabilities, being able to get sort of helpers that allow you to do numerous actions throughout the game. It's a very, very unique experience. And again, the deck building probably feels the most ancillary in this particular game compared to all of the other ones on this list, but it is still a very important aspect to the game itself. Even though it feels a little bit more ancillary, the cards are very, very important. They're absolutely vital to the whole thing. But it's a really fun game. I highly recommend it, whether you're a fan of Cthulhu, Sherlock, or both, as I am. That's one of the reasons why this is a bit higher up on the list, is because I really like both categories, and just smashing them together actually ended up working very, very well. It's a fairly complex game, so it can be really tough to get into it first, but once you're into it and you know how to play and the rest of your group knows how to play, then not only does the game go much, much faster and more smoothly, but it's just as I keep saying, a wonderful experience overall. But either way, that's it. A Study in Emerald, my number 3. At number 2, I've got a game that I have talked about many, many, many times before on numerous merits, including its ability as a solo game, as well as just its general capability as a semi-co-op and also as a deck builder. The game itself is Thunderstone Advanced, right? Now, or Thunderstone Advance, rather. I've talked on many occasions about how I prefer this over Dominion, personally. I've talked many times about how I love the game's solo capabilities, but really the deck-building aspect of this is obviously a central core mechanic that I've never talked about really in depth too much. One of the reasons that I really, really like this and the deck building mechanic is that it's relatively similar to Dominion in that sense, where from a really massive pool of possible cards, you only pick about a dozen or so that you'll be playing with throughout the entire game. And this one is really interesting because you actually specifically get certain types of cards, and you get a certain number of each different type of card. Whereas with Dominion, you could potentially get like no attack cards, you could potentially get no defense cards, you know, things like that. It's possible simply because of the way that the random selection works. Whereas with Thunderstone Advance, if you keep drawing the same type of card, like if you keep drawing a whole bunch of weapons, then you have to put some of them away so that you can ensure that you get different types of cards. But this is a really, really fun game just because of the context that it's in. You guys may know that I'm a really big fan of role-playing games. I actually really enjoy playing primarily D&D and the Star Wars RPG, Edge of the Empire. And the thing is that this gives a reasonable feel of a dungeon crawler. That's really what it's designed around. And the whole point is that you're going in and you're defeating a bunch of monsters. The solo game is the monsters are coming out and you have to fight them before they get to the village. And it's a very well designed game. It's a lot of fun. And again, semi-cooperative, but you know, you always have the person who won because they defeated the most bad guys and stuff like that. The deck building mechanic is obviously very central to it. Everybody has the same starter deck in this case, unlike say with Core Worlds where you know you got at least a decent amount of variety. But either way, it's a ton of fun. It's a really great example of a deck builder. I personally like it a great deal more above Dominion, but that said, there are also a lot of expansions for this as well as for Dominion, which is another reason why this is higher up on the list. It's just because you get so much more variety by using the expansions. There's even one that's based off of what's it called, Numenera, which is another really fun role-playing game actually as well. So there's just so many options that you've got going on with this. It's a wonderful game. I absolutely adore it. Thunderstone Advance specifically, my number 2. At number 1, I've got a game that is actually serving as the placeholder for the actual number 1, but they are so very similar enough that I felt that I could, you know, get away with it just a little bit. So, here's my placeholder. Legendary. Marvel Legendary, to be specific. Now, for those of you who have played Legendary before, then you may know that the actual game is Legendary Encounters, which is actually a game that is similar to this, but based off of the world of the Alien and Aliens movies. I actually much prefer Legendary Encounters to Marvel Legendary, but that said, both games are absolutely incredible. They are great examples of deck builders. Marvel Legendary is obviously really fun because, you know, it's superheroes. It's the Marvel Universe. It's something that a lot of people, especially nowadays, are maybe not intimately familiar with, but they're at least like, oh yeah, I've heard that before, type of thing. And Aliens, you can arguably go even further without, in that sense, you can even get some people who are potentially a little bit older to at least recognize what's going on, and they're familiar with some of the things that are happening. But I mean, Marvel Legendary, very fun. You get to face off against all the different supervillains. They have different powers that proc at different times. You have the, like many of these games, you have the standard, not standard, but you have the communal set of cards from which you're all picking, you're trying to purchase. You've got the bad guys that you're trying to fight. With the Legendary Encounters, it's pretty much the exact same thing, where you've got a bunch of different cards from which everybody can pick. But the Legendary Encounters, I really like the theme a lot more. I think that it makes a lot more sense in the context of you essentially have a horde of xenomorphs coming after you. And just the way that it progresses and the way that the bad guys are coming after you, quote unquote, I think it just makes more sense in the context of a deck building game, because it really feels like more of a race against time. And that's what you really want from something like, not even necessarily a deck builder, but something that has an alien theme to it. And it really makes more sense. Whereas with Marvel, I mean, anything with supervillains, then, you know, all you can think is that, haha, eventually my plans will come to fruition. And probably after you have found me in my secret lair and I have monologued the entire thing to you. And, you know, that's basically what a lot of people think of when they think of, like, comic book style bad guys. Which, again, is not necessarily a bad thing, but in the context of a deck builder, maybe not quite the best way to go about doing it. But again, I absolutely love Marvel Legendary. I just happen to love Legendary Encounters, the Aliens version, a little bit more. I like the theme more. I like the way that the cards function together a little bit more. I love the fact that this is Marvel because it's things that I can recognize. It's, you know, the heroes that I know, powers that make sense, all that kind of stuff. I love that you've got, in both cases, you've got the synergies between the different types of cards, similarly to Star Realms that I mentioned earlier. All sorts of stuff. Overall, both of these really great games, very nearly just tying for first place, but Legendary Encounters just slightly edging out Marvel Legendary for the #1 spot. you so very much for being here. As always, make certain that you put any and all feedback in the comments below. Particularly, again, I mentioned earlier, do you like games that use deck building as a core mechanic? Are you okay with it as a more ancillary mechanic? Do you prefer it when it's sort of a side but still in the game? What do you like? What are the games that you like? Again, this is a huge category. There are so many games that utilize deck building in some way or another. I would love to hear what you guys think, what your personal favorites are. But with that, thank you so very much again for being here, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much again for watching my video for my top 5 favorite deck building games. As I mentioned a little while ago, this is an absolutely enormous category of game, and I know that I didn't cover nearly all of the bases. So please let me know your personal favorites, let me know why you like them, all of that kind of stuff. As always, any and all feedback below. As always, I also have several of my playlists linked up at the top of the page so that you can see some of my new content, and if you want to see more from me in the future, please click on that big giant subscribe button. You can also follow me on Twitter at DannyCGamingSci so that you can see when I start live streaming video games as well as upload new videos. With that, thank you very much again, and I will see you next time.